Christen Crosby never imagined that everything she had built could be so easily torn apart. On a rainy, early morning, she stood by the office window on the 23rd floor, gazing out at the thick, gray clouds drifting across the Silicon Valley sky. The faint light of dawn filtered through the glass, casting a dim glow that reflected the weary faces of the staff who were slowly waking up. NexCore Technologies, the company she founded, had become a recognized name in the artificial intelligence industry. People called her the warrior of Silicon Valley, a leader who always led the charge in technological revolutions. However, today, something unusual hung in the air. She could feel it, a heavy sensation she couldn't quite understand. NexCore hadn't been an easy journey in the early days. It was just her and a few co-founders from a small space in a rented building. She and her team gradually built a powerful little empire in the tech world. She wasn't just creative. She played a strategic role, identifying trends and steering the company through seemingly insurmountable challenges. After 5 years, the company had grown from 4 employees to over 200, with a stellar creative team and products proudly launched to the market. But everything changed one dark morning. On that day, she arrived at the office as usual, preparing for a meeting with stakeholders and the leadership team to discuss upcoming projects. But as soon as she walked into the meeting room, she sensed something was wrong. Liam Harris, her co-founder and longtime friend, was sitting there along with unfamiliar faces, major shareholders and investors. There was no greeting, no wave, no smile, as there had always been. She sat down, trying to maintain her composure, but inside, an uneasy feeling began to rise. The meeting started with compliments, but they no longer felt genuine. Every gaze, from people she once considered allies, now avoided making direct eye contact with her. Liam began speaking about new strategies, about changes in the company, about how NexCore would enter a new phase of development. Then, like an inevitable shock, he said, "We've decided to change the leadership structure of the company. Due to recent changes and the new direction, we feel a leadership change is necessary." He paused for a moment, eyes locked on hers, and then continued, "Christen, we're sorry to say that the company will no longer need you." Those words struck like a hammer to her head. She couldn't believe her ears, being ousted from the company she had founded, with no clear explanation, only avoiding glances and a suffocating silence filling the room. Not only had she been removed from the CEO chair, but she had been robbed of everything she had built. All her hard work, all her efforts, were rendered meaningless in an instant. After the decision, she was escorted out of the building. She stood silently outside the door, feeling as if she had been shoved into a deep abyss, with no one reaching out to pull her up. The pain of betrayal was excruciating, but what hurt more was the silence of those around her, the people she had poured her heart into building with. Liam had not only taken the company, he had erased all traces of her. The accomplishments she had etched into the company were now nothing but fading memories. She stepped outside, the coldness of the city enveloping her. The heavy door closed behind her, separating her from the world she had created. She walked down the glass staircase, looking up at the overcast sky. Everything seemed to be crumbling. All of it had been taken away. But this was not the end. It was not the end. She didn't want to cry, didn't want to let her emotions take over. She didn't even want to seek justification from those who had betrayed her. She wanted only one thing to prove that she was not someone who could be easily defeated. Her trust had been violated, but strength doesn't come from clinging to the past. Her strength would come from change, from rising quietly and proving that she still had value. Christen wasn't in a hurry to act, but inside, A plan was taking shape, a plan not to seek revenge through rebellion or to pay with blood and tears. She would take her revenge through success, with a spectacular comeback, strong and undeniable, after leaving NexCore. Christen didn't know what to do first. She felt like a stone that had fallen to the bottom of an abyss, yet didn't shatter. She could sense the silence surrounding her, a space filled with disappointment and emptiness. But just as the feeling of loss surged within her, one thought flashed across her mind: she couldn't let herself fall. The truth was, she knew that no one other than herself could change her life. Being forced out of the company had taken everything from her, the company, friends, and her reputation. But one thing she still held on to was her knowledge and skills. The years spent at NexCore had shaped her into an expert in the high-tech industry. She knew how to solve problems, manage teams, and run a large company. And more importantly, she knew she could rebuild everything from the ground up. At first, she distanced herself from everyone, seeking a space to think. She rented a small room in an old building, a place where it was just her and the ideas in her head. Each day began with a cup of black coffee, industry books spread out on the table, and articles about new technologies. She retraced what she had done before, delving deeper into the advanced technologies NexCore had developed. But she knew it was time to follow her own path. Every morning, when the first light of the sun filtered through the small window, she began to write down plans and strategies that would help her come back and reclaim everything. The first days were not easy. She didn't have money to hire a team, no partners to begin with. In those moments, she remembered a phrase from an old friend, someone who once told her, "If you can see the goal, never fear the path to it." And indeed, her goal was crystal clear: to build a new, independent company, but not just for revenge. She wanted to prove that what NexCore had lost was the opportunity she would seize. Meanwhile, life around her didn't stop. She began following the news about NexCore. The company had continued to grow, but not in the same way as before. The products no longer carried the creative mark she had built. People she had once trusted were now caught up in bad decisions. She realized that those mistakes would be her opportunity to return. A week later, while working at her old wooden desk, she received an unexpected call from Cassian, NexCore's former financial manager, someone she had trusted and considered a valuable ally. "Christen, I know where you are," he said, his voice sounding urgent. "Things are not as you think. They're in trouble, and I need your help." Cassian didn't hide the troubles NexCore was facing. The company was dealing with a major issue regarding a crucial artificial intelligence product that Liam's development team had failed to complete as planned. That was the first opportunity Christen saw. This was the weakness she needed to seize. "I'll help you," she said, her voice firm. She didn't rush to return immediately, but instead, she quietly began reconnecting with old industry friends. She didn't need their help right away, but she needed information and connections, brief meetings, exchanges through emails, and discreet video calls followed. Every step she took, every decision she made, was calculated carefully. She began gathering important information about NexCore. She knew that the company was no longer what it had once been, and not all the employees were loyal to Liam. She not only reached out to those who had worked with her, but also began approaching technology experts who could help her build a new foundation, a better, more creative product. She rewrote plans, revised old strategies, and started assembling her own team. One autumn day, as the sun was nearing the horizon and the crimson glow of the afternoon light spilled into her small room, Christen sat before her computer screen, smiling as she saw positive responses from potential investors she had contacted. She knew she was on the right track. Everything was slowly starting to come back to her. Just then, she received an email from Marcellus James, one of the people she had hired for a research project when she was still at NexCore. "Christen, we can do this again, but we need to be clever and not rush. Get ready. If you need financial help, I can connect you with some partners." His words, though simple, were like a small spark lighting a flame of hope inside her. She realized that no matter what, she could keep going, not for revenge, but for a comeback stronger than ever. She didn't just want to prove to NexCore that she could succeed, but also prove to herself that, even when pushed to the brink, she could rise again and restore everything. Everything began on a gloomy morning when Christen received information from Cassian about the problems NexCore was facing. Liam, whom she had once trusted as a friend, was now struggling with the mistakes he had made by neglecting an important product the company was developing. At that moment, Christen knew that this was the opportunity she had been waiting for. Even though she was no longer the CEO of the company, she still held crucial information and had the ability to assist NexCore's engineering team in overcoming the challenges ahead. She quietly began reconnecting with people who had worked with her in the early days of NexCore. Some of them still remained loyal to her, despite most being swept up by Liam's promises. Some didn't hesitate to share insider information that Christen hadn't known. She was careful with every step, not rushing, but approaching them slowly and discreetly. What she discovered only made her more determined. Liam's mistakes were beginning to cause the collapse of the company's flagship products. Meanwhile, at NexCore, the situation grew worse. The engineering team had lost its motivation, and projects were being delayed due to a lack of clear leadership. Liam couldn't fill the void Christen had left. The products she had worked tirelessly on for years were now becoming a burden. Meetings with investors became tense, and many of them began considering pulling out. Rumors about NexCore's potential bankruptcy started to spread, becoming a topic of discussion in the tech community. Christen knew that now was the time to act. She couldn't stand by and watch the company she founded crumble. She decided to build a breakthrough strategy, but this time, it wouldn't be NexCore's product. She would create something entirely new, a technology that was superior, something everyone would have to recognize and accept. She called it Project Phoenix, a groundbreaking artificial intelligence software that she believed would prove to the world that she had not been defeated. At the same time, events outside her control added to the mounting tension. A major meeting was held at NexCore to address the company's financial situation. The investors had demanded Liam provide a convincing explanation, but in that meeting, all Liam could do was try to defend his reputation without presenting a clear strategy. His failure to complete critical projects had caused him to lose the trust of many. Key partners were backing out, leaving only those too weak to change the tide. Liam didn't realize that while he was sinking deeper into confusion and fear, Christen had been quietly rebuilding everything from the ground up while he scrambled to put out fires within the company. Christen was secretly reaching out to potential new partners, pulling them into a project she believed would turn the tide in her favor. Her initial partners had returned, not because she was wrong, but because Liam's mistakes had become too clear to ignore. Christen also knew that, to succeed, she needed to restore her image in the tech world. She didn't want to be just a ghost from the past. She wanted to be a pioneer, a true innovator. She began participating in seminars, writing articles on artificial intelligence, and introducing her new ideas. These efforts not only helped her regain her position, but also opened up many new opportunities. She received invitations from tech organizations, investors, and industry experts to discuss her vision. Slowly, NexCore began to spiral into crisis, and Liam's mistakes were beyond repair. The company had lost customers and partners and, more importantly, the talented people who had once made it successful. The continuous failures to launch new products had caused NexCore's brand to fade in the eyes of investors. This only made the prominence of Project Phoenix, which Christen was developing, all the more apparent when her product was nearly complete. Investors began returning, and former partners slowly began to realize that they had made a mistake in not supporting her. She not only helped them see the true value of her product, but she also demonstrated that it was Liam who had led NexCore into a dead end. Then, one day, when NexCore announced a completely failed project, the product that Christen had quietly developed was launched, and it immediately caused a sensation. Project Phoenix became a turning point in her career. This was the moment when everyone began to recognize the shortcomings of NexCore and the importance of Christen Crosby. She didn't just return to reclaim what she had lost, but to prove that the biggest change didn't come from trying to hold on to the past, but from looking to the future with a new vision. As time passed, everything around Christen began to change in ways she hadn't expected. The months of laying low had paid off, but not without its challenges. However, she could now feel a powerful transformation within herself. She was no longer just a woman who had been betrayed. She was no longer just an outsider watching everything she had built crumble. She had risen from the pain, the deceit, and the wounds she had endured. Every step she took now felt like a firm step forward, and she knew she was ready for what she had been waiting for. The last time she faced Liam, she didn't feel hatred, only calm. There was no anger, no blaming, only the realization that what had happened had happened. Liam was no longer her enemy. He was simply a piece of the past she had left behind. But what mattered most was that Liam and his mistakes had helped her discover her own strength. She was no longer the person she once was. She had changed. His wrong decisions hadn't made her weaker. They had made her stronger. She looked at her product, Project Phoenix, and couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. It wasn't just a technology product. It was proof of her resilience. The people she had once helped in the past, those within the tech industry, had begun to notice the difference. Investors no longer overlooked her. They came to her because they realized she wasn't just a founder. She was someone who could lead them into the future. She wasn't just creative. She saw opportunities others didn't. Yet, despite her success, one thing she couldn't forget was NexCore, the company she had founded and lost. It had become something different, something unfamiliar, and it was Liam, with all his mistakes, who was now facing the consequences. Investors were pulling out one after another, and the company was facing a massive financial and reputational crisis. Continuous negative news about NexCore began to surface, and Liam's decisions were now publicly criticized. His lack of vision and his confusion in handling the crisis had caused the company to lose its credibility in the industry. NexCore's failures weren't just about failing to launch key products. They were about the irreplaceable loss from the people who had once placed their trust in the company, investors and partners, who had chosen NexCore because they believed in Christen's vision, were now bearing the weight of disappointment. Those failures were proof that Liam couldn't shoulder the responsibility that Christen had left behind. And even though everyone had withdrawn from NexCore, there was one thing they couldn't erase: Project Phoenix. Christen began receiving invitations from major tech organizations. Founders and industry experts wanted to hear her speak, to understand her vision. Things were gradually rebuilding, not just within the company, but within her heart every day. She felt herself being reborn. It wasn't a weak return, but a strong one. The congratulations. The applause she had once received when she was CEO of NexCore were now returning. But this time, they weren't just praise, they were the recognition she had rightfully earned. Then, when Christen felt she was ready for the next step, an unexpected call came from Marcellus James. "Christen, I think it's time for you to come back. NexCore is facing a storm, and you are the only one who can fix it." Those were the words Marcellus spoke when she picked up the phone. She knew the time had come. NexCore, after all, was still part of her past, and she was too familiar with the problems the company was facing. But now, she wasn't an outsider. She was coming back, not to save the name of NexCore, but to prove that she could rebuild it all from a new foundation with real values, proper strategies, and a team ready to work toward a shared vision. Liam was no longer her concern. His mistakes had made her steadier. She didn't need to confront him again. She knew that things would unfold the way they were meant to. NexCore would either realize its mistakes or fade into oblivion. But with Project Phoenix, with her vision, a new chapter would open, and she was the one who would write that story. Now, she wasn't standing on the sidelines anymore. She was ready to return, not just with a product, but with a renewed belief, a belief in herself, in the values she had upheld, even when she had been pushed to the bottom, and this time, no one would be able to stop her. Christen walked into the meeting with a confidence she had never had before. This feeling was different from the past, when she had led NexCore with hopes that were not yet fully solidified. This time, she was no longer an outsider, but a leader returning to prove that not only could she overcome failure, but she could also create new, stronger values than ever before. She was fully prepared for every possible scenario. Today's meeting was one of the most important in her career. It was the official launch of Project Phoenix, the product she and her team had quietly developed over the past months, faced with a highly competitive tech market. She had no intention of confronting NexCore or Liam directly. Her goal was not to bring him down, but to let the tangible results speak for themselves. And the results she brought were exceptional, not just technologically, but also in practical value. Project Phoenix was unlike anything NexCore had ever developed. It was a completely new artificial intelligence system with self-learning and self-improvement capabilities, designed for applications in fields that had never been explored before, from data management technologies to applications in healthcare and education. This product was not just an improvement, it was a significant leap forward in technology. When Project Phoenix was announced, it immediately garnered attention within the tech industry. Investors began to reassess the value that Christen brought. The endless praise from industry experts and partners proved that, even when pushed to the bottom, she could rise again and shine. And when the product was implemented in real-world applications, positive results started to emerge. Her company began receiving orders from large clients, ones who had previously overlooked her, thinking that NexCore was the true hub of innovation. On the other hand, Liam found himself in a difficult position. His mistakes and his clumsy handling of the crisis had caused NexCore to fall apart. The company's products gradually lost their competitiveness and could no longer meet the growing demands of the market. The products he had once taken pride in had become a burden, as they couldn't be delivered on time. The investors he had once relied on were now pulling out, and relentless criticism was being directed at him. The decline of NexCore was not something Christen had hoped for, but she couldn't deny that Liam's mistakes had created an opportunity for her. She didn't need to confront him head-on to succeed. Her return was the clearest proof that no one could defeat a person who had enough faith and perseverance. For her, It wasn't a personal victory, but a turning point in her career, a sign of recovery and growth from the pain. As for Liam, the loss of important partners and the inability to maintain NexCore's reputation eventually led to him no longer being the one in charge. He had isolated himself, no longer trusted by investors or employees. The apologies he sent couldn't replace what had been lost. NexCore was no longer a company he could be proud of. Everything had turned into a series of mistakes, and in the end, he had to pay the price for his decisions. Never in her life had Christen felt as relieved as she did now. She didn't feel any satisfaction at the collapse of NexCore or Liam's downfall. She knew that failure wasn't something she wanted to see, but it was the price he had to pay for dishonesty and ignoring the true values in business. She had lost everything once before, and now she didn't want anyone to go through that kind of pain again. As Project Phoenix continued to succeed, Christen was no longer an outsider. She had reclaimed what she deserved, but more importantly, she had proven that success didn't come from revenge or rivalry, but from persistence and faith in real values. Success wasn't just something she wanted to achieve. It was proof that those who are pushed down are not the ones defeated. She didn't need to stand on a podium or accept praise. These achievements, these solid steps along the path she had chosen, were the greatest price she had paid in her eyes. There was no anger or hatred, only calm and a strong belief that everything could begin anew, as long as we never give up. Her story wasn't one of revenge, but of recovery, of the power to rise after failure, and perhaps that was the greatest message she wanted to send to the world sometimes. The greatest strength is knowing how to stand firm even when everything is against you.